Welcome to A Moment of Bach, where we take our favorite moments from the composer's vast musical output, just a minute's worth or even a few seconds, and show you why we think they are remarkable. We are your hosts, Alex and Christian Giebert, and last week's cantata, Himmelskönig sei willkommen, was so good that we decided to spend 2 episodes on it. So today, we will look at the opening Sonata movement. The Bach cantata that's probably my favorite one opens with an overture in the French style, a French overture, and it is appropriately regal, and it has a marching rhythm. Da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. And it was written in the same period of Bach's life as this one, when he was the court master at Weimar. Part of his duties included cantatas for the Schlosskirche, the palace church. It was modest in size for a church. That does help to explain the forces used in this cantata, which are smaller than what he would do later in Leipzig. The opening instrumental movement, which he labeled Sonata, it doesn't say overture, it doesn't say grand or stately or anything. Grave, adagio. It's CPE Bach. That's what we have. Yeah. Grave sounds sad, but it just means very slow. Adagio usually means slow, so it's a little maybe redundant. I don't know if Carl Philipp Emanuel needed to put 2 tempos in like that. I don't know if they were from Bach's original. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, usually those both mean slow, but grave means even slower. And as there's also a sort of more serious connotation, as you say. So maybe by putting both of those, he meant to say that it was supposed to be grave, but not quite as grave usually is? Maybe. So if you have a full complement of an orchestra at your disposal, and a king enters the royal hall, the palace, when the king enters, you might have some big loud brass fanfare. You might have trumpets, trombones, drums, and so on. But there would be a sort of a feeling of slow march as the footsteps of the king and his entourage were slowly moving forward up the aisle. Everybody's standing out of respect. But this cantata opens with something that's not labeled overture, and the instrumental forces are rather humble. One baroque recorder, a violin, just one. 2 violas, which was his custom at this time, although for whatever reason, not later, when he mostly went with a standardized violin 1 section, violin 2 section, viola section. Plus the bass line here, and that's it. The violin and the flute trade off a delightful French Overture theme that actually couldn't you imagine this being way bigger? This could be big, huge brass band, but it's so delicate. And yet, the first thing that strikes your ear, probably, is the plucking. Pizzicato is marked in the score for the violas and the bass instruments. He was clearly trying out stuff like this around this time because he did use pizzicato in a more experimental way in Cantata 61 as well. Although that was for a more narrative reason, that was supposed to represent knocking at a door. And yet, knocking at a door is a theme in this cantata. Maybe I shouldn't say that it's a different reason.
Yeah, it might actually be that.
Maybe it's the same, because the very first text, "Welcome, King of Heaven, let us too be your Zion. Come in, you have captured our heart." The sub-theme of Christmas often, or even more so Advent. Of preparing your hearts for Jesus to come and enter in. In that way, your heart is like a chamber or a room, and so he can knock at the door, and you can let him in.
These were written in the same year.
Oh, really?
1714.
Yeah, 1714. So this would have been first then.
Yes.
Because of the church year.
Exactly, because that was written in December.
Yeah.
Or for December 2nd.
This cantata, as you mentioned last week, Alex, it's for Palm Sunday. This has a real kinship and parody with 61. Nun kommt der Heiden Heiland. That one is for Advent, preparing our hearts for the coming of the baby Jesus, and happening at a time after which the congregation at Weimar would not hear a lot of music because of the season of Advent, the tempus clausulum, or the time of nothing, the ceasing time of music. And there also wasn't much during Lent, which is a little bit of a longer church season, with the exception of this Palm Sunday cantata, so they wouldn't have heard a lot until these knocks.
Actually, the Palm Sunday, I'm pretty sure they didn't have music on Palm Sunday either. Because when Bach repurposed this for Leipzig, he used it on the Annunciation instead, Palm Sunday. So either they didn't allow Palm Sunday music, or they didn't allow this cantata for some reason. But yeah.
In Leipzig.
Correct.
But in the Schlosskirche, that's where it was premiered.
Exactly. That was Palm Sunday. Yeah. 1714.
Mm-hmm. It would have been around his birthday, his 29th birthday.
Oh, yeah.
So these plucks, maybe they are the steps of a king, the footfalls of the king into the palace. In this case, the church, the palace church, because of the title Himmelskönig, Heaven's King. That's the title character of Jesus. And we welcome him. So it's, in that way, it is a French overture. But also, it's understated. Now why, though, Alex? Like, why? Besides practical reasons, maybe this church was smaller, he only had maybe 10 or 12 musicians, but why not a French overture with a big rolling harpsichord chords all over the place and active big string sections, maybe a trumpet, maybe a full choir right up top, a bunch of winds, a bunch of oboes and flutes, and festive instruments even, like a set of timpani. Why not? Why is this so small and unassuming?
Because Christ rode in on a donkey in like a humble way, right? Isn't that the reason?
Yeah, it's what I suspect. There's no words in this opening sonata, but setting up this text and this Palm Sunday cantata, yes, that must be it. He's not coming into a literal palace, and he is not a military leader.
Exactly. Christ at the time did not fit into the idea of what the people thought the Messiah would be at the time.
They were hoping he would militarily
save them from the Romans.
Yeah. And even the disciples even were often a little bit misunderstanding of his pacifism. I mean, they were with him till the end. Well, he said, "I will be with you until the end." But they were totally on board, but they also kind of had the wrong idea, because they were bringing their swords everywhere, you know, and when Jesus was arrested and then Peter took his sword out and cut off that guy's ear, Jesus said, "This isn't what we're doing here. We're not supposed to be I'm not your military ruler," basically.
Right.
But they thought that. And so instead, he came humbly as a child. And in Palm Sunday, in the case of that, he comes in a humble way, not on some big caravan of horses or anything, but rather a donkey. And then his crown, not of jewels, but of horrible thorns.
Yeah, and I think musically, besides just the sparser instrumentation, there are other things that are pointing toward this humility. I mean, obviously this solo, the only reason why it sounds like an overture in the first place is because the solo instrument, or in this case, it's really a duet. But when it starts, we're hearing just just one instrument lay out that rhythm, that French Overture rhythm. And then it's not even really a French Overture rhythm in terms of the way it's played. At least not by this particular group. The Netherlands Bach Society here is playing it. If you're listening closely to what the rhythms are, they're not double dotting, which is a thing you do in French Overture style. So for French overtures, what I mean by that is the music will show a single dot, and rather than get into specifics of what eighth notes and dotted eighth notes are, I'll just tell you it's this. Bum, ba bum, ba bum. That's a single dot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. You can think of it as the first and fourth note of these quick beats. But for French Overture style, you typically double dot those beats, which basically means playing that last one late. That one that should be on 4, it's like after 4. So it's bump, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. They're just much more stretched.
That's true. They could have chosen to do that here.
It's what you do in a French Overture style. And they didn't. Because I think they are being smart about the fact that this is not really a grand French Overture. The fact that it's set apart from being that is what, as you say, makes it a little more interesting to paint the Palm Sunday text here.
Yes, but on the other hand, they are reading the rhythm in a different way, in a sort of shibboleth, like only the people who know this kind of way, where they must know it is a French Overture because of the first note. The first note is written like there's the beat, and then it's bum, 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 ba bum, ba bum.
Oh,
bum,
yes, it is.
But they're going to play it, and they do play it as 1, da 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 da, rather than 1, dun 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 dun. For whatever reason of quirk of musical style, of Baroque style, you have to read that rhythm a little bit different than it's written, and you have to dot that rest.
Yeah, but I mean, every musical style that has notation has this. Jazz has this too. There's some things that are swung that you swing. There's some things that look like they're not swung, but you don't swing them. And when there's dotted rhythms in jazz, sometimes depending on the tradition, it's different and it's not swung exactly, but it's stretched out more. There's that in lots of traditions, I guess is my point. You use the word shibboleth, a very appropriate word. It is a sort of mark that you know what you're doing in the musical idiom to play it that way. And not only did they do that with that pickup note that you say, but there's also just a general sense of the space between the notes, that they are trying to make it sound a little bit French Overture-y. Mm-hmm. They're not playing it da 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 da. They're adding space.
They are, and they're not playing it in a way that if you like when you take like the fundamentals of music course in high school, or you take this as a child or a young adult, this isn't how you would play something marked adagio, or even especially grave, adagio for strings. It's like the most mournfully sad and also smooth thing ever.
Right.
And then grave is like cognate with grave, which literally reads in English as the word grave. Seems extra serious. You wouldn't associate those markings with a sprightly rhythm, even if it's slow. Right. I think it would be easy to make a mistake and play this like bum. Da, 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 da. Well, yeah, even as I say that, you're going to know as soon as there's even 2 notes in a row like that all the dots, it has to be more of a processional, and it has to move a little more.
It does. Well, and this just goes to show why it can be so intimidating to get into this kind of music in general, much less to play it. Because if you just look at those musical notes and you know how to read music, that is not enough, right? Based on all the stuff we just said. So there really are all these very culturally specific additions to what you need to know to perform this with any degree of authenticity.
That's right. And so these footsteps, or maybe these knocks at the door, are steady until measure 16, where they suddenly occur twice as slow. And then, in an unusual move, which is pretty rare in Baroque music ever, the instruction is made to start using the bow again right after you're plucking. Now, in modern orchestral music, and even a little bit later than the Baroque period, that's common. And they can switch really fast because they hold the bow and then they pluck, but they can go back and forth really quickly. But in this case, it's instructed. And it happens during a wonderfully suspended sounding chord. A chord of great harmonic momentum. A chord marked with the figures on the bass note 6, 4, 2.
Yep.
That is a third inversion 7th chord, dominant 7th chord, which means that the tone on the bottom, in this case C, scale degree 4 of our key of G major, it wants to go down, and above it is a D major triad. And those pitches are represented by the numbers 2, 4, 6, or distance in steps above the bass note.
It wants to go down.
It wants to go down, and
But can it?
well, it's interesting because it is the lowest note in the continuo, and that makes it a low C, and so a cello cannot go down even any bit lower than that. But that's okay, because on the next measure, after this chord is suspended and held longer than any other chords have been yet before, after 6 beats, Bach simply just moves an octave up with that C on the bass note so he can step down the half step to the B.
Yes. Although, in this recording, it sounds very smooth. So smooth that I didn't notice the octave up jump.
Well, you often don't in bass continuo parts. You often don't notice something that leaps by only an octave, even though an octave seems like a big leap, but it's just because it's the same pitch and there's octave doublings going on.
Well, but where I'm going with this is the camera shot is actually on the double bass player at this moment.
Oh.
He actually does play the higher C on the long note and then repeats it.
Well, he has to.
Yeah, because it looks like he doesn't have, I can't tell, but it looks like he doesn't have a C extension on the double bass, which, like,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know enough about double basses to know about what the extensions were like in that era, but I know that double bass players that play Bach a lot do like to have them because these continual lines always go down to the low C.
This bass that he's playing on does not have it, though.
Right, so they have to adapt, yeah.
If anybody out there plays bass, but even if you play electric bass, I think this is actually a really fun moment to look at, because Alex, you're right, I'm looking at this right now. This guy who we've seen in so many Netherlands Bach Society videos.
Yes, it's Robert Frenenberg.
Yes. He's also interviewed in one of the Passions documentaries. He probably has a few different instruments, but this one has frets on it, which is somewhat common at the time. And being an electric bass player, I really love looking at this instrument that he has here because I feel like I could play this. I am a very amateur upright bass player. I don't even own one. If and when I ever get the chance to do it, I have to work really hard to get my brain to remember the distances of the half steps on the fingerboard because there's no frets. It's also my biggest problem with playing the violin, and I don't know how you all do it. Those of you who play the violin and viola, I don't know. It's so narrow, the half steps. Same goes for the upper parts of the cello as well. But this, I could totally play this. I see frets here. It looks just like an electric bass. I know his middle finger is on C. It's right where my middle finger would be if I was playing that C on the A string right there. It just looks very familiar. You're absolutely right, Alex. He doesn't have the lowest few notes. So a cello will go down to what's written, let's call it just the low C. The bass is sounding lower, but it reads the same part as the cello in this time period. So if Bach writes anything below an E, the bass's lowest note, the bass has to play that up an octave. But the result of the bass player, whose instrument sounds an octave lower than written, playing from the same musical score as the cellist, the result is a nice, firm octaves of the bass line, except for those lowest few notes of the cello where they're actually in unison, because the bass player has to play those up an octave in terms of how he reads them in this case.
Yeah. Like listening to a lot of modern rock or classic rock or whatever, and stuff that uses guitars and electric basses, it is maybe not surprising that a lot of times there are just these unison lines being played on the guitar and on the bass with it's just a classic rock sound, really.
It's going to work 100% of the time. It always sounds good.
Yeah, and it comes from the Baroque era, like literally. Like that's what it comes from.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just funny to me to connect something like, Rage Against the Machine, which has like tons of just, like most of the musical material in Rage Against the Machine is just unison lines on the guitar and bass. And the singing is not even melodic, it's mostly kind of just rap. And like these unison lines on the guitar and bass are just so similar to how the cello and double bass interact in the Baroque era.
Yeah, because they can kind of learn essentially the same part, but the resulting sound will be a very satisfying 2 different octaves of that same music simultaneous.
Yes. Wherein the top octave has a sort of crunchier, more interesting, like biting sound, and the lower octave has the sort of fuller tone that your ear wants from the like fundamental pitch down there.
And this just all goes to show us too one other thing about the bass line in Western music, which is that it matters a little bit less its direction, like its contour going up and down, whether it's going up, leaping up a seventh or stepping down 1 step, or leaping up an octave or just staying. That matters less than the actual pitch it's on. Its octave matters a little less. And in this case, and in some other cases where the composer might even be even more slick, sometimes you don't really know if it's going down or up, or you kind of think it's always going down more than it possibly could be, or up more than it possibly could be. But what's happening is that there are multiple instruments playing, and the composer has scored them to switch octaves at different times. And it is a kaleidoscope sort of, we call it the Shepard Tone effect. It's this very strange feeling of, the thing is going down. You don't know where the real bottom is, but you just know it's kind of all feels like it's going down, but it couldn't possibly be going down because it would have to start over at some point, but it just kind of doesn't. It's like the MC Escher type of optical illusion that you see with the staircase. It's always going up or always going down, but it couldn't be, but it is. But that's real in music.
Yeah.
And so in this case, we're talking about something in this little example here where you can't really tell if they're in complete unison or in octaves for just a moment, but it doesn't really matter in this case. This is not a case of Bach trying to play a trick on us. This is just a matter of convenience, but it's just an interesting thing about the bass line. And my favorite moment here, I guess this all counts as one moment because it all happens within just a few seconds, but that switch to arco, that switch to bowing is so powerful because you suddenly have this sustain that you haven't had. But then, speaking of the bass line, when this C does resolve down like it has to do to B, makes its way back to D, which it has to do because the rules of harmony dictate that which is our dominant functioning chord must move on to G. But then, when that G cadence does arrive, the tonic chord, the feeling of finality, the feeling of home on the downbeat of measure 19, it's just, the rug is pulled just a little bit more.
Yep.
There's no bass note on the beat. The bass is gone. We spent time last week talking about how strange it is when a note is just gone and there's just a rest on a beat. And this is, I think, maybe a foreshadowing of a later movement in this cantata where he would pull the note just away.
Yeah.
But it's only the bass note in this case. The other instruments do have a complete G major triad, although the viola too, the lowest of those notes is a B, so it doesn't by any means sound final, like with a G on the bottom, even though a G is on the top, melodically.
But it also doesn't really sound that strange because that material you're talking about in the bass is just that overture material again. It's that ba-bum, ba-bum thing, so
it gets the melody finally,
does.
And it never did. It had all the plucks, but now it gets the melody, but it actually gets something more interesting too, because it doesn't get to resolve on its beats, because it always ends up on some sort of chord that sounds kind of inverted, although it's actually a 7/6 suspension if you look at the score.
Yeah, yep.
So it never has finality until it really does at the very last note. That's how Bach further suspends and extends the ending, which is brilliant, because it's just all of a sudden in a sequence. Sequence, the term we use for a harmonic pattern that is separated by the same number of steps. See the one that first begins on G, goes up to G, and then it has E, and then it goes up to E, and then it has C, and then it goes up to C, so that's a sequence.
It's such a satisfying last few measures, especially with that series of suspensions pulling down by step, and then the flute or recorder comes in at the top and then continues the suspensions from up high.
Mm-hmm.
It's just masterful.
And I've used the word suspended as like the English definition of like it feels like it's floating. But in this case, in the last couple seconds, Alex, we've been using suspension in the music theory way, which is like these are tones that occur over strong beats and have dissonances over them. And if you're using an addition that has numbers, figures on the bass lines, these are when the number is 4 or 7. Those dissonances that then go down. 4s go to 3s. 7s go to 6s. And those are the best moments, because they're prepared for us, and then there's the crunchiness of the 4 or the 7, and then there's the resolution into the 3 or into the 6. And then there's other tones, because that's just 2 tones, like a bottom note and then a top one, but there's more than that. So the ending of this delightful, understated overture for a humble king with donkey footsteps plucking instead of big, huge, triumphant armies marching is appropriately humble, but with some twists of beauty at the end.
If this introduction to the cantata Himmelskönig, willkommen, has inspired you to listen to more of this cantata, well, you definitely should, because it's a great performance led by the new artistic director of the Netherlands Bach Society, Johanna Soller. Also, as I mentioned last episode, we'll definitely return to this cantata at another date, because there's a lot of other great things going on in the later movements. For now, you can listen to that and a lot more at Netherlands Bach Society's website, where they are currently in the process of their All of Bach project, completing every single work of Bach in high-quality audio and video recording. We are blessed to be able to use musical examples from the Netherlands Bach Society. Thanks once again to them for allowing that for us. And thank you, listener, for listening. Tell a friend about a moment of Bach. We always find that when we ask about how people found out about it, it's usually that's the way. People are just telling friends. We love to hear that.
So what will we look at next week?
Next week we will return to the 6 cello suites. The 6th suite will take a listener request to look at the courant movement from that cello suite, BWV 1012.
Until next time, enjoy those moments.
Do it like a bunch of times.
Ba-bum, 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 ba-bum.
Nice.
Good job.